Welcome to the Outthinker podcast. Each week, we talk with forward-looking strategists and innovators that are challenging the status quo, leading the future of business, and shaping our world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network.
I fundamentally believe in the ability of large companies to disrupt themselves from the inside out and the outside in to build growth engines to drive meaningful growth. I mean, if you think about it, right, these companies, they have ideas, they have talent, they have brand, they have channels, they have customers. So there's really no reason that they cannot beat the startups at their own game.
That was Linda Yates, the founder and CEO of Mach49, the growth incubator for global businesses with clients including Goodyear, Gundersen Health, Hitachi, Intel, Shell, and many more. She's the author of The Unicorn Within, How Companies Can Create Game-Changing Ventures at Startup Speed. She's a seasoned CEO and board member with over 30 years of experience bridging Silicon Valley and the Global 1000. With her firsthand experience in one of the largest geographic incubators of unicorns in the world, Silicon Valley, Linda has fine-tuned a proven framework for building and sustaining corporate ventures. As heard in the highlighted clip, Linda believes, as do I, that incumbent enterprises can unlock their innovative capabilities, contrary to commonly held dogma of large established companies being stagnant and slow. The reality is that these large companies have many advantages to launch transformative projects that startups can only dream of. In this episode, Linda shares with us why your company needs to learn to pivot and adapt strategy to execution ASAP, or risk becoming part of the 88% of companies that won't survive the next decades. The 4 pillars needed to jumpstart your company's growth engine. How to overcome the reticence many companies face in allocating funding toward seemingly risky new ventures. How to ensure your organization is ready to successfully accelerate and scale opportunities and make these stages fail-proof while doing so. Ladies and gentlemen, Linda Yates. Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I know you're on a crazy whirlwind tour right now. Where are you joining us from?
Right now, I'm joining you from London, but in the last 2 weeks, I've been in the Dominican Republic, Stockholm, Helsinki, Copenhagen, and Oslo.
Wow.
It's been crazy. Been wonderful, though.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to land you for a few minutes to talk to us about your work and your book and your approaches. But I want to open up with 2 questions I ask everyone. First, just to get us to know you a little bit personally, could you complete this sentence for me? If you really know me, you know that.
That's a great one. If you really know me, you know that despite the fact that I'm a Silicon Valley kid, I passionately believe that the large challenging problems we face in the world, from climate change to sustainability to water to poverty to racism to education, actually need our large companies leaning in and able to experiment, innovate, and disrupt to drive change. Because our governments, many of them, are transitional at best, dysfunctional at worst. And as much as we love NGOs, they have a hard time driving change at global scale as Global 1000s have the ability to do. So I really believe that to fundamentally change the world, we need our large companies leaning in and helping to make that happen.
I love that. And the numbers make that so clear. And it's really not helpful. Who's going to save the world? Is it going to be the government? Is it going to be the NGOs? Is it going to be the startups? Is it going to be the big companies? Our problems are bigger than that. So this is a podcast on strategy, and you do lots of strategy for a long time. So I'd like you to answer this question for me. What's your definition of strategy?
That's pretty easy for me. I think really strategy should help you define the from-to shifts that you want your organization to make to drive meaningful, sustainable growth. To help you to do that, it needs to define the domains that you want to explore to drive that shift. And it needs to identify who matters most and what matters most, who are the stakeholders that matter to your organization, and what's the pain that they're experiencing that you want to solve within those domains. That's really what strategy is. All the rest should be about experimentation and execution.
Yes, and I start seeing the outlines of your approach that you bring to large incumbents in that. So I want to get into that, but I'd like to know, first of all, what got you interested in strategy? Why is strategy important? I kind of hear that in your answer, but I'd like to hear it from you.
I always, whenever I introduce myself, I tell people I'm a native Californian, right? Which is only interesting because I grew up in Silicon Valley with all the people who founded the venture capital industry. They're all friends of my family and my parents. So I've been deeply immersed in that ecosystem literally since I was born. But most of my professional career has been in the boardrooms and C-suites of the Global 500. So I was really never interested in strategy for strategy's sake. I consider myself bilingual between the boardrooms and C-suites and the VCs and startups of Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley, where it started, but also now having lived, worked, or traveled in 70 countries, familiar with all the ecosystems of innovation that exist around the world. But I've always been really, really interested in entrepreneurship, right? So how do you basically start with that definition of strategy we just discussed, but make that strategy really agile, really customer responsive, really actionable? How do you drive from strategy to execution? And so, I talk a lot about why I think doing another strategy or developing a bunch of PowerPoint slides really isn't going to get companies where they need to go. So they really need to continue the dialogue past, okay, great, here's our strategy. Oh, here's our another strategy. Here's another strategy. But if you actually don't take action on that strategy, then it's really a challenge. And I can go through some of the interesting statistics that have happened recently if that's of interest.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so this is why I feel really, really strongly that strategy is really important to kick the thinking off and to cast the net wide and really imagine what those from-to shifts are. You've got to drive to execution because if you think about it, companies are going out of business faster than ever before. If you look, Forbes did a really interesting study. And if you actually look at the average life expectancy of a company on the Fortune 500 list 50 years ago, the average life of a company on that list was 75 years. Today, it's 15 years and declining. But the scarier statistic is that of the companies on that list 50 years ago, 88% of them are off the list, out of business, or completely irrelevant. Only 12% remain. And guess what? Every single one of them did strategy projects. So it's not a failure of strategy definition. It's a failure of strategy execution. If you want to look at a more recent statistic, Pricewaterhouse released their annual survey of global CEOs at Davos this year in January. 40% of the chief executives surveyed basically are convinced that their organizations will not be economically viable within 10 years if they do not transform. And so if you look at the statistics are dire, and it's not for a lack of strategy, it's a lack of execution. And even if you don't think these companies are going out of business, even today in our recession, pseudo-recession, wherever we are right now, there are over 1,200 unicorns, right? These are startups with a valuation of $1 billion or more that have not gone public yet. Over 1,200 unicorns with a total valuation of almost $4 trillion, okay? So that means even if you're not going out of business, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. I have this slide that I share in my keynote that basically says, listen, there is no reason that any of the hotel companies could not have created Airbnb. There's no reason that any of the titans of financial services could not have created Stripe, which today still has a $65 billion valuation. Many people are using Miro boards, right? Well, Miro boards are just digital stickies. Who invented the digital sticky, right? Today, Miro is valued at almost $17 billion as a unicorn. The whole point is, look, and it's not that these people don't have these ideas. Their failure is not a failure of imagination. It's a failure to build. That's what Mark Andreessen has said. And you think about it, the barbarians are still at the gate. The VCs are still there sitting on billions of dollars of capital trying to disrupt these companies.
So many people would cite those examples as evidence that there's just something wrong with these dinosaurs, these incumbents. But you take a different view. Why is that?
I fundamentally believe in the ability of large companies to disrupt themselves from the inside out and the outside in to build growth engines to drive meaningful growth. I mean, if you think about it, right, these companies, they have ideas, they have talent, they have brand, they have channels, they have customers. So there's really no reason that they cannot beat the startups at their own game. It's just about helping them build their growth engines, which include 4 pillars, which are venture building, venture investing, strategic partnering, and targeted M&A. But those growth engines have to be really focused on execution.
Can you walk us through those 4?
Yeah. So let's talk about those 4 pillars, right? So we literally say, and this is really why we wrote the book, right? It was to democratize what we do and to basically enable people to build these growth engines to drive meaningful change. So if you think about the 4 pillars, one of the pillars is organic venture building. I absolutely believe large companies need to do their own venture building, not just buy, partner, invest, which are the other three pillars. But that one's really important. Why? Because you have incredibly smart people inside every organization. And if all you do is go outside, they're going to be saying, wait a minute, what about me? Give me $120,000, put me in that incubator. I know where the bodies are buried. I know where the core assets and competencies of the organization are. I know how to build these ventures. I've had this idea. And so you really want to leverage the incredible talent and internal capability that you have to build ventures. And it's also that these are people who really understand your business, your customers, et cetera. But then the other opportunity, though, is besides the venture building, the other three areas are on the venture investing side. One is a lot of large companies are creating CVCs. Very, very important, because if you have your venture building on the one hand, that's great, but the CVCs keep you current on what's happening out in the world. And so you've got the CVCs, and that's where you're venture investing. And we're helping large companies create CVCs all over the world. Amazing. And what does it allow them to do? It allows them to place small bets and to be looking at areas of adjacency that they might not be totally ready to dive into, but it allows them to place those small bets, to invest in them, and to, in essence, follow what these organizations are doing and not do it through a third party, right? You don't get a seat at the table if you invest through a third party. You've got to really do that investing directly yourself. The other piece is strategic partnering. In some cases, you've got large organizations that literally don't invest a dime. But what they're really, really good at doing is being strategic partners for startups and using that as a way to solve their own pain or their customers' pain. And so strategic partnering is also a really interesting way to dip your toe in the water and stay current on what we call the art of the possible. The third is what we call targeted M&A. So a lot of people, the way that they have basically driven growth is through inorganic growth, right? It's through acquiring other companies. Well, at some point you get so big, you can't acquire more growth. You can't find enough companies with enough revenue to acquire growth. So we leave the big corporate development, big M, big A, to our investment banking friends. What we're focused on, we talk about targeted M&A. So we have a large industrial client. We have a venture that we have gotten to $50 million in revenue. That's a unicorn by Silicon Valley standards, but it's a $60 billion company. So that doesn't move the needle. But we can get it to $1 billion in valuation by leveraging the cash that large companies have on their balance sheet to buy a $100 million company. And so targeted M&A is a way to augment and accelerate the ventures that you're building. And that's an amazing way to beat the startups at their own game, because they're not going to have cash on their balance sheet to enable them to execute that kind of a roll-up strategy.
I got it. So how do you overcome the reinvestment of the cash on the balance sheet? There's going to be a treasurer that's going to want to say, well, we need to balance this out with an investment that is a lower risk investment rather than take a risk on something that could maybe be a unicorn. How do you overcome that?
The reticence of...
Yeah. I mean, because the sort of financial principle is our, assets and liabilities should be at equivalent risk profiles. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well...
What do you say when a client brings that up? How would your answer to them be?
I say you've left $4 trillion on the table right now, right? I take my logo slide and I do the morphing of large company with startup that they've left money on the table. But I think the real thing is, look, there's three fundamental things that we talk about with our clients when we come and focus on this. Because a lot of people will say, okay, well, we can't do this because we're a large company, or the CFO because we have to balance our assets. But my argument to them is, listen, especially for a CFO, the whole way you're doing this is you're basically building in a way where you're removing the greatest amount of risk on the least amount of capital. So one of the things that we talk about, what's the underlying three philosophy behind what we're doing? Why do I say that the not so secret about the Silicon Valley is that it's actually not that hard, right? And so it's all about, first of all, understanding customer pain. Nobody in the world said that they wanted a minivan, a microwave oven, or a DVR or a VCR. But what they could tell you is what their pain was. And they could tell you that they didn't get home to cook a healthy meal, that they were never able to watch their favorite show, or they were having to cart an increasing number of kids, dogs, and sporting equipment to myriad places, okay? So they could tell you their pain. It's up to you to then identify how to solve that pain. And what I say to CEOs all over the world and heads of strategy all over the world is, look, surveys are statistically significant, but strategically irrelevant, because all you've done is outsource your visceral understanding and empathy for the customer to somebody else, who then is going to repackage it and sell it to somebody else. You've got to actually do real customer interviews, okay? So that's number one, understanding customer pain. Then you marry that with the art of the possible. What are the current trends and technology you can use to solve that pain? This is why having a CVC is really important, why venture investing and partnering is really important, because it's keeping you current on that art of the possible. Uber doesn't exist if we don't have mobile phones, real-time payments, and GPS. So the CVC can help you. And if you don't have a CVC, then you've got to figure out how the mothership is going to stay current on the art of the possible so that you can bring that. I say to people all the time, look, if you have incredible customer pain, but to solve that pain, it's time travel. Well, we don't have time travel yet. So you got to shelve that idea. It's not feasible yet, or you got to kill it.
I love it. So there's the visceral understanding of customer need. There is the art of the possible and understanding whether technologies even would offer a solution or not. And then can you take us from there? What's the third part?
Then the third thing, getting back to your CFO question, is removing the greatest amount of risk and least amount of capital by basically placing a series of small bets. So this is my message to the CFOs. The way we think about funding in Silicon Valley is we think of funding like an onion. Every layer of onion is a layer of risk. It could be financial risk, it could be market risk, it could be technical risk. In the case of a large company, it could be governance risk. You love it to death, starve it of oxygen, right? So the job of any entrepreneur and any internal entrepreneur is to basically remove the greatest amount of risk on the least amount of capital by basically running a series of experiments, placing a series of small bets as you go and launch the company. And the idea is, what are the risks? What are the experiments or pilots you're running to prove you can mitigate the risks? What are the metrics and milestones that you have got to achieve that demonstrates you've mitigated that risk? And only then do you unlock subsequent rounds of funding. So number one is reducing the amount of funding from a CFO's perspective. That's important. But the second thing that the CFO should be helping drive is we've got to look at this as a portfolio. No venture capitalist invests in only one venture. Nobody builds only one venture. You've got to do it at scale. And to do it at scale means you've got to adopt a venture capital mindset and not be throwing too much money at these ventures that you're either building or you're investing. This is placing small bets. So my argument back to the CFOs is you don't have to worry so much about this balancing if you're being very rigorous and disciplined in the method by which you are funding your ventures as they go to market.
Yeah, so you're de-risking that investment. It feels a little bit like our friend Rita McGrath's, her discovery-driven planning approach. So on one hand, you may want to figure out all of the what would have to be trues and then make a big bet. But instead, what you're doing is you're chunking them and doing it in sequence, and that de-risks it.
Yeah, but it's not about planning. It's about execution.
Yes, right.
So again, this is a great point, right? This is why Rita is a great friend of ours and why she's a faculty partner at Mach49 is because you're going to be focused on the strategy, but that strategy has then to be translated into execution. The whole point of the book, The Unicorn Within, How Companies Can Create Game-Changing Ventures at Startup Speed, is for it to be a how-to guide, right? To democratize what we do, to enable people to be there with a catcher's mitt and say, great, hand me that strategy, hand me those domains that you're interested, hand me that pain you think we're trying to solve. But now let's go build ventures, let's go invest in ventures, let's build a growth engine to actually drive growth for our companies, drive change for our communities, for the world, whatever their aspiration happens to be.
Love it. I want to go back to the first point because you said something that I've heard and I feel is right. And I love this phrase from Steve Blank, the answer is not in your office. You have to get out there and talk to customers. And you talked about the needing to have the visceral understanding. Philosophically, I love that. It makes sense to me, but I want to know, why is that? Why do we need the visceral, direct understanding of customer need?
So everybody talks about unicorns in Silicon Valley, right? What we don't talk about so much is the roadkill. If you think about the average VC hears about 2,000 ventures a year, does due diligence on 200, invests in 20, and 2, return the fund. Their success rate's about 12%. So no large company can survive that kind of a success rate. So that's an important thing we can talk about later. But part of the reason is you have super smart engineers who think they have a super smart idea and they actually don't ever go talk to the customer. And so they bring it to market and guess what? Nobody wanted it. And so we're very, very methodical. My friend Drew Harmon, he has this great line, which is customer insights are the currency of credibility. Everything else is uninformed opinion. So a CEO comes to one of our venture teams that we're working with and they say, I have this really great idea. I think this is what we should build. The team, because they're focused on actually interviewing real customers, will say to that person, great, where's your customer quote? We'll load it in Airtable, which of course they don't have because this is mostly coming out of their heads. But we will then say, oh, if you don't have that, we will test it. Because if you're not constantly testing and iterating, experimenting and pivoting based on what the customers are telling you, what the customer need is, right now, you have to obviously have other things, right? There's 3 things that go into incubating a venture. Understanding the customer, then identify what's the service solution, the product that you could build or buy or partner invest to basically solve that pain. But then there's also, is there a business model, right? Like, can you make money on it? So there's lots of things that go in. It's not just the customer pain, but you got to start with the customer pain. Because if there is no customer pain and the market's not big enough, then you're dead in the water. You can have the best product all you want, but if nobody wants it, forget it. It's very important that what people hear is that we're not talking about user research. We use the word customer development very intentionally because every interview, and in the course of 12 weeks, venture teams, we expect them to do somewhere between 150 and 400 in-person interviews. Could be by Zoom, it could be whatever. But this is not surveys. Now, yeah, you're going to use surveys later, but in the initial development of a venture, you're actually talking to customers all the time, every day. And we'll go through 3 different types of interviews in the course of those 12 weeks. One is what we call open-ended pain point interviews. You're not asking them, hey, do you want this? You're basically saying, tell me about the last time you tried to basically rent an office, or tell me about the last time you tried to buy a car, or tell me about the last time you tried to decarbonize your supply chain, right? Or you were part of having to be part of decarbonizing a supply chain. That is the first way we start. Then you're going to start to see patterns. That pain, you're going to synthesize that pain. Then you get to move to the next type of interviews, which is what we call value proposition or storyboard interviews. You're getting to put dozens of storyboards in front of customers to basically show them potential solutions to solving the pain that you've basically heard over and over again.
So to make sure I understand, the storyboard in this state is the possible from to. It's not necessarily what the solution looks like.
No, because that's third. That's the prototype.
Yes, right. Okay, good.
So there's an in-between. So it's from open-ended pain point interviews to storyboard interviews that are hand-drawn. They're literally storyboards, right? And you can iterate on them very quickly. And the reason why they're very low res to begin with is because the neuroscience tells us that if you put something too polished and too finished in front of someone you are interviewing, they will think you've put a lot of time into it. They will feel sorry for you and they will not tell you the truth.
Interesting. Wow. Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of neuroscience behind the mechanisms by which we do this. So the second is you're doing the storyboards. Again, you're going to start to narrow down. You're going to do NPS scoring. You're going to do ranking and ratings. And then you get to go to your prototypes. And prototypes, if you're doing digital, are obviously going to be wireframe. You're going to start with low res, go to medium res to high res. If you're doing hardware, you're doing mock-ups. If you're doing an experience, you're going to do simulations, right? So prototype covers a broad definition. But customer development, the reason why we use that word instead of user research is that every moment you are interviewing a customer is a moment for them to say, wait a minute, you're really listening to me. You really want to solve my pain? Well, guess what? I want to do the next interview. And then I want to be in the prototype interviews. And oh, by the way, by the end of 12 weeks, we're not here to do some theoretical abstract exercise. You are there to build a new line of business, to build a new venture that's going to launch, which means that by the end of those 12 to 14 weeks that it takes you to incubate a venture, you should have pilot customers raising their hands saying, wow, this has been incredible. I want to be a pilot.
So this, again, is all about execution and about doing it.
But that's why the customer is so important, that there's a methodical, rigorous, robust way for going through that exercise with customers, at least in the incubate phase. If you're investing, you should be having the same expectations of those entrepreneurs. If a startup comes and pitches to me, the first thing I'm asking them is, what's the pain you're trying to solve? If they can't answer that, then I'm not investing.
I gotcha. You've made so much clear for me that wasn't clear before, but also you've opened up so many other questions and we're reaching the top of our time with you. So I don't have time to ask all of these questions and people can get the book. They can find you on Mach49. So I'll give you 4 questions and ask you to just pick one that you think is the most useful. This idea of living with the 15% success rate, how is that possible or is it not possible and what do you do? You need a lot of ideas. You're talking about thousands and thousands of ideas. And my experience is large companies don't have very big pipeline. Is that a problem or how do you do that? Where does it sit? Who organizes it? Who does the incubating and the interviews? And the last more open-ended question is, what are the top things that incumbents get wrong that they should look at?
Yeah, great questions. So let me just hit it at the high level. The goal here is to build a pipeline and portfolio of new ventures across the spectrum of new venture creation, from ideate to incubate to accelerate to scale. Large companies are really good at scale. They're not as good at the ideate, incubate, accelerate. Problem with ideate, to your point, is garbage in, garbage out.
So typically, clients will come to us
At one of 4 stages of the ideate process. One is they already have an idea. Great. We take them straight into challenge framing. We won't have time to talk about it, but it's in the book. You can look at what challenge framing is, but it really is the way that every venture should start. What's the pain you're trying to solve and who matters most? So the other way some people come to us is, hey, I have too many ideas. And so you have to learn how to do a portfolio review and adopt a venture capital mindset. What's incubatable, what's not. The third is you have companies that come, like we had one company come and say, we're really interested in road safety, food, and water. Well, you can't incubate water, but you can incubate a zero water home project venture like what we did with one of our large Japanese clients.
And then the fourth way people come is, look, I want to know where my internal entrepreneurs are, and I want to come up with ideas, and you can run a venture competition. Now, there's good ways and there's bad ways to run a venture competition, but that's ideate. Then you move into incubate. We've talked a lot about that, right? It's customer, it's product, and then it's getting, by the end of 12 weeks, you should have a very robust and rigorous business and execution plan. Not a 5-minute demo day, not a speed dating pitch. You really have to have a robust business plan. That's what you can do. And then from incubate, you move to accelerate. And this is actually where most large companies fall off the cliff. They get really excited. They decide to launch it. They decide to put money into it. And they forget that they still need to be removing the greatest amount of risk and the least amount of capital and running experiments. So when we think about accelerate, we think about it in 3 phases, kind of a seed phase, a series A, series B, what we call build to
validate, build to automate, build to grow. But more importantly for your listeners is that within accelerate, there are actually what we call 5 swim lanes. One of them is product. Yeah, everybody thinks about, they want to build a product, they want to run experiments, they want to run pilots, they're super excited, but you're here to build a business. So the other 4 swim lanes, you need to be running experiments and placing small bets and running pilots is also in what's your go-to-market? How are you going to reach your customers? Are you doing inside sales, field sales? Are you doing digital? What's your business model? Swim lane 3. How are you going to price? How do your customers want to pay? You got to run experiments there because you might build it as a SaaS model, but then people want to pay in a different way. So you got to run experiments there. Third is how are you going to deliver? You could have the first 3 swim lanes perfect, but it's so expensive to deliver that product, service, or solution. You can't get to positive unit economics. Your venture's dead in the water.
And then the last is team.
Team is super important. Are you able to recruit and retain the talent you need to build this particular venture? Which is why we often get into conversations about compensation with large companies, which we don't have time to go into today. But how do you create phantom share plans?
You pay your salespeople. So that is the big picture process.
And what they get wrong, there's only 3 things people get wrong. One is no methodology. That gets to your point about, you can't afford to copy the VCs or the traditional startup incubators because they only have a 12% success rate and you got to hit higher or the stakeholders won't let you do this very long. And usually what that means is you need methodology. You need a repeatable, scalable model where there's a lot of rigor and it's very robust and you get real execution plans. So that's one. The second is mothership friction. I used to talk about mothership management in a more negative way because of the orthodoxies, inertia, and antibodies, which still exist, but flip it around. You can seize the mothership advantage. You have the idea, the capital, the channels, the brand, the customers. If you figure out a way to get a lot more people engaged in the growth story, then you have that opportunity to seize the mothership advantage. And then the third big mistake, and this is for your CEOs, your chief strategy officers, your CMOs, your C-suite, and your board members, is that the senior executives fail to grow.
They have got to get rid of the management review board mindset,
right? Where you're going to come and present your idea and I'm just going to dump all over it because I'm the senior guy or gal. You've got to shift that mindset to becoming a top tier venture capitalist. You need to be thinking in terms of portfolio. You need to be thinking in terms of option value, not net present value. And you need to be thinking in terms of a new set of metrics, right? I'll leave you with this because I think this is super important. One of the pieces of research that we're doing is on valuing the unicorn within, okay? Why the financial markets need a new model for valuing the global 1,000. This is super, super important because the C-suite needs to adopt a new set of metrics for their ventures that is different from the way you value the core and legacy business. It's not appropriate to measure them on the core legacy business metrics when, oh, by the way, they're trying to take you into new markets. And B, it's not appropriate to measure them on a quarterly basis. So what they have to do is they've got to adopt the same types of metrics that a VC would. And oh, by the way, those just happen to be the same set of metrics that the financial markets already know how to value. They do it every single day. They take a startup public, right? They value them on customer acquisition and revenue growth. Your ventures that have access to your 20 million customers and are doing a similar thing to that startup have way more opportunity to become a unicorn than that startup does But the financial markets, they need a kick in the butt because they know how to do this, but they're not doing it. And frankly, I hold the financial markets accountable for the hundreds of thousands of jobs that are lost when a Kodak or a GE goes out of business because they are not valuing the growth and innovation efforts that these large companies are making in the same way and giving them the same hall pass that they give the startups in Silicon Valley.
That's a great point. And oh my God, that could open up a whole nother several series of podcasts. I agree 100%. Well, Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to unpack this for us. And I love that you've taken this experience and put it in such a structured set of frameworks and tools that really democratizes it for everyone. And the impact that this is going to have, how can people continue to learn from you and connect with you?
Oh, thanks so much. Well, they can go to the website. They can follow Mach49, which is great. They can buy the book, obviously. And then the other thing is that we've just announced we've launched our digital platform called 2401, which is 49 squared, which is, again, it's providing access to what we do to a much broader audience because it's a SaaS-based platform that allows people to build and invest in ventures, leveraging all the same tools and templates and technology that we use when we're working with our clients. You know, a lot of our clients are really trying to, not just do one venture, but build their growth engine. So we help them kind of fly the plane while they're building the plane. But our whole goal is to build capability, not dependency, and to work ourselves out of a job. So if people have questions, they can email me, linda@mach49.com. Very easy, but we always are open to helping people and answering questions and really helping people to drive change in their organizations and frankly for the world.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for being open to us and for sharing with us here today. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our guest. Thank you to our producers, Karina Reyes and Zach Ness, our editor, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kai-Han Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week with another episode of Outthinkers.